This is Decoding Learning Differences with Kimberly Lavelle, and this episode is Reading Simplified with Marnie Ginsberg. So Marnie is a guest on our podcast today. And Dr. Marnie Ginsberg is the founder of Reading Simplified, whose mission is to support busy, overwhelmed teachers learn a research-based system of effective and efficient instruction that accelerates all students' reading achievement. Marnie's surprise at finding so many of the middle school students in her classroom reading well below their grades spurred a passion for finding and disseminating solutions. What followed included private tutoring, university research, the creation of an evidence-based reading program, and ultimately the development of Reading Simplified. And in this conversation, this is definitely not geared just to teachers. As usual, our conversations tend to be geared more towards parents and what parents can be doing, as well as some great tips for those of us who are also teachers, or you can send it to a teacher and they might get a lot out of it. Enjoy the conversation. Good morning, Marnie. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Kimberlyn.
I'm so happy to have you. It's quite a pleasure. So you have been in this world of the science of reading for quite a long time, and doing, especially compared to, I feel like right now it's like there's a big surge of interest and attention. But you've been in it for a long time. So first of all, how long have you been in that world, and what changes in that time have you seen, if any?
Oh, sure. I had my master's and I found out I didn't know how to teach struggling middle school readers how to read. So I consider that to be similar to what many teachers and parents are going through now as they're discovering the so-called science of reading movement. So I remember that, and that was in the mid to late 90s. And then I did discover that there was this amazing wealth of science in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And so I've been doing that ever since, but I've been like, someone hiding in the corner, because it's really not been accepted in the mainstream to talk about how important sound-based decoding and recognizing phonics and perceiving the sounds and words, aka phonemic awareness, that was not cool. So I've been trying to disseminate that information ever since. And one of the big things that I got to do as a doc student, and then as an early, soon after I finished my PhD, was help lead the development of the targeted reading intervention, which was aligned with the science. And we were asking teachers at that time, who were mostly balanced literacy teachers, to embrace an approach to teaching struggling kindergarten and first grade readers how to attack unfamiliar words with sound-based decoding, integrating phonemic awareness, the perception of individual sounds and words, and phonics knowledge, just like SH is shh. So that started in 2005, and I did that for 7 years, and we had great success. But it's at the same time, we were still kind of we had to be a little sneaky about it. We didn't say this is what science says about how you should read, because we didn't want to have a head-on collision with their beliefs. We said, what if this would help your struggling readers? These are kids that are, like as if they needed something different, which isn't true. Everyone needs the same thing. Those that struggle or have learning difficulties in the content area of reading anyway, they generally just need more intensity and more expert instruction. So I did that work, and then that led me to create Reading Simplified, because that work at the TRI, the Targeted Reading Intervention, was very profound, but it wasn't getting disseminated. So Reading Simplified was my approach to my attempt to take some of those similar things that I had seen work with the TRI and fold it into a program that reaches the masses, both teachers and parents from all over the world. And that idea started in 2013, but really didn't have something available to train teachers until 2016. That's the Reading Simplified Academy. So even as early as 2016, or as late, I should say, as 2016, we were still a bit of a fish out of water. And I didn't market myself as teaching the science because people weren't interested in it. And so basically most of my career, I have been swimming upstream or against the mainstream, because most people who are concerned about how to teach reading and teach teachers or teach students how to teach reading have thought that the more of a whole word approach was acceptable, and that phonics could be either not used or only used minimally. And that was kind of folded into a variation of whole language, which became known as balanced literacy, which is over 20 years old. And that's been the current, the water that all of us have been swimming in. And so that is the culture, but at the same time, the science has marched steadily forward all these years. So they've just been not communicating with one another. So science hasn't changed. Of course, it keeps learning more, but in general, they've known some of these basic principles, at least about beginning reading, since the 60s. And it's gotten much more, convincing data in the 80s and 90s. But and even more now, we have brain scans that can align with the experiments that have been done in decades prior that show, yes, this theory that we had about how the brain learns to read, you can see another depiction of it in a brain scan, and you can see how fast the brain learns to read, and you can see how the brain's recognition of words is tied to sound or speech, which was a really revolutionary insight in the 60s and 70s, because people think of reading as so visual.
Yeah.
You have to be able to see the words, right? And surely you do, but you also are co-opting the language system, perceiving sounds so that you can match those perceptions of sounds onto those little squiggles, which we call phonics, that the C is K and the A is A and the T is T. That's that insight that science has had and continues to expand on for decades. It's just that the culture of teaching has been out of alignment with that. And what's so exciting to me is since say 2018, it's hard to exactly pin down the date, but just in the last 5 years or so, this science of reading movement has come on the scene. And a lot of that has to do with the reporting of Emily Hanford from American Public Media. She did some amazing documentaries, and now she has a very popular and influential podcast called Sold a Story. And that is releasing this information that I just told you about how we've been teaching out of alignment with the science. So now it's going mainstream, and people are interested in the science, and teachers are getting trained, and they're asking questions, and they're eager to change their pedagogy. And so that has been super cool to see. And I feel like I get to, come out of my shell and be a little bit more frank about what I have known. And of course, I'm always learning as well.
Yeah.
And so at Reading Simplified, we're making more clear how the activities we have always suggested do align with the science. We're just drawing more attention to it. Whereas before it was there, but it was in the background because there wasn't the demand.
Yeah.
And as a result of this movement, Kimberlyn, states are changing policy. Districts are swapping 180 degrees their curricula. So major changes are happening in the school systems. And a lot of parents are catching on and are interested in as well. Of course, the pandemic brought the attention to a lot of parents about how their kid was or was not learning to read.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of things are shifting, and we're seeing some improvements and bright lights. But there's still a long way to go because millions of teachers have been taught since their university years, and with ongoing professional development, and with most programs that they've had access to, have been taught misunderstandings at best, or you might even call them myths about how the brain learns to read. So that's going to take a while to overturn and bring everybody back up to kind of a baseline of more reasonable practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about you're a fish against water, the water's, swimming upstream. The stream is starting to shift, but it's not all the way shifted. It's
not
like
at all.
You get pockets where everybody's going with you, and then there's pockets where everybody's still going the other way.
100%.
Because I hear different stories all the time about there's parents that are in a district that they're very like the science of reading based, genuinely structured literacy. They're teaching phonics and they're teaching morphology and they're teaching, they're actually teaching kids how to read. Um, and then there's other schools that bristle at the idea that they could have ever been doing anything wrong and that there might be a better way. So it's interesting to see that, and the kids definitely, it pains me when I see those difficult districts that are reluctant to make any changes because it is painful for the children who are suffering in those districts.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're seeing that. Those children are going to include many who are going to struggle because of the instruction.
Yeah.
And we know that. And changing the instruction, just for instance, in the domain of phonics, that's not all that's needed, but it is a quick win for a large percentage of our students.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, okay, so we've often worried about students not being at proficiency in reading, and there's been a bunch of different attempts to solve the problem, but some of those attempts made things worse. Um, so what do you see as the cause for the lack of reading proficiency, and how is that impacting the lives of students?
Well, reading is really a cultural accomplishment that is determined by a multiplicity of factors. So it is hard to pin one thing down. But what I was talking about to get started is really my number one um, finger to pointing at the blame that are the way our teachers and publishers have been disseminating information, the way that the teachers have been taught and publishers have been disseminating information, that's out of alignment with how the kids learn to read. So many kids are struggling just simply because of instruction, particularly in the beginning years, or when kids pick up the code and learn to read easily and become fluent easily, which is possible with good instruction for many kids, then they can read widely and learn about the world. And that helps them with all the other subject areas. But we are kind of throttling that early opportunity to develop strong early readers who will read widely because the three cueing approach, which is dominant thinking in the balanced literacy model, kind of keeps the decoding skills hidden from the child. So some kids deduce the code no matter what, but probably well over 60% are struggling with how the code works because they're directed to look at the picture, or they're directed to just look at the first sound, or they're directed to use their reasoning instead of use their eyes to attack the word left to right. So I put most of the blame for the early years anyway in instruction. Another big idea that we need to overturn is that reading comprehension is mostly based on learning strategies for how to think, like how to summarize, how to predict, how to infer. Those are helpful, but they're much less helpful than learning information. If you read a physics text and you don't know anything about physics, you will not comprehend that text.
Right.
So we need to double down in elementary and middle school in building knowledge systematically as part of our reading instruction. Read science knowledge and history knowledge, geography, music, art, those domains are actually the knowledge necessary to be good at reading comprehension. So those are two big instructional shifts that we could change that would make a really big change in our outcomes. Of course, then there are also other cultural factors. A lot of children are coming to school with vocabularies that are much less developed than other kids. And that just puts them at a disadvantage from the beginning. So perhaps strong early childhood opportunities where language is built, because reading is, like I said, is built off the back of language. We need to establish that early for all of our children, even our low income children, who in general are more likely to hear fewer words spoken and fewer sophisticated words spoken. So it's harder for them to just make that transition into school-based literacy. So that's one thing. Of course, we have, the broader, the impact of poverty broadly affects the child in so many ways, like their health, even prenatal health, um, dentist appointments, all these things impact the child and could be changed that would lead to improvement in literacy. But a really, frankly, relatively speaking, the low hanging fruit is just to change our instruction to be in alignment with phonics. And that's what we're trying to present at Reading Simplified. One way of doing that, for at least the component about how to teach kids to read words.
So is that the main focus then for Reading Simplified is like phonics, just hitting phonics really hard?
Yeah, and I like to call it decoding because phonics is essential, but it's only one element of what it takes to do good sound-based decoding. You have to develop phonemic awareness to be able to perceive those sounds so you can process that phonics information, and you have to have some good strategies for how to attack an unfamiliar word. And then you also have to have a lot of practice decoding and rereading so that those words you've decoded become automatically recognized, and then that leads to fluency. So yeah, Reading Simplified is a streamlined approach for the teacher to learn how to teach kids rapidly how to get to fluency, which is only part of the puzzle, as I talked about.
Yeah, right. So you talk about the science and art of reading instruction. And what do you mean by that?
Well, as I've discussed, we know a ton about how the brain learns to read, and it's super exciting. But we don't know on Monday what a 5-year-old who knows b and only what he needs, from a science experiment. There's still the teacher judgment and insight, intuition, and experience that comes into play. So while the science of reading movement is very exciting and we have a lot of answers, we have broad brushstroke answers. We don't have answers for every minute decision. So it's a tricky balance where we want to encourage teachers and parents to be interested in what the science says, but we don't want to mislead them into thinking that science has figured everything out and that if you don't have a scientific answer, you can't do it.
Right.
We still are going to have an art to our practice. And frankly, I don't believe that we will ever be able to get science to the point where we can, Mrs. Smith knows what Johnny needs on Monday and what Sally needs on Tuesday. That is going to always be an art, her knowing their cognitive and emotional and behavioral needs and a developmental sequence of how reading happens, and matching the two with activities that are high leverage based in science. All of that, putting those pieces together is a sophisticated challenge. And so we want to elevate the science because we've really historically put it in the toilet, and that's a tragedy. So, but as we elevate it, we should not be misled into thinking that every instructional turn has already been answered by a researcher at Harvard.
Right.
Still up to the teacher to be a good teacher.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about, like, as you were talking, I was thinking about these like scripted programs, and that's one of my difficulties with some of the scripted programs is, okay, but what about this particular kid in front of you that isn't getting it or already knows it? Like, we have to be able to shift. I like, there's definitely a place for those programs so that you can hand them to a paraprofessional and they can just do it and not really mess anything up. But yeah, really good teaching where you're really able to individualize and identify the little nuanced details using all of the knowledge and that science that we know. And yeah, we don't have all the answers. I was also thinking about, like, as you're talking, those studies that I've seen where sometimes it's confusing, like, well, why is this particular program rated so high? It doesn't seem any better than any of these other ones. What's really going on there? And you have to, like, really dig deep to get any possible explanation as to why it's rated high and potentially falsely rated high. Like, there's some that seem to be rated high because they're only working with, like, a very small amount of instruction. So they're able to make really great progress, but then they don't keep going. So they're rated high compared to ones that do keep going. And they both maybe made really great progress in that beginning part, but then it gets harder. So I think there is a lot there where we do have to look at the science And I like that, put an art on it. Use our intuition, our knowledge of individual kids, all of that. That's really important.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to develop with the previous program I developed, the targeted reading intervention and Reading Simplified, was say to teach the teacher, here's the structure, here are some activities that are high leverage, and here's a way to think diagnostically so you can meet either your child's needs or your small group's needs. That is a better model, I believe, than the scripted approach. Although, as you said, a scripted approach has its merits, particularly for a beginning teacher. They can get a sense, they can start off pretty quickly with little PD in many cases. But I believe our teachers are capable of learning a system of thinking diagnostically that meets kids where they are. And that's going to get them to accelerate more to their potential. Because when you teach the whole class, you're lucky if a third of them actually need the instruction you're delivering. A third of them don't have a clue what you're doing, and a third I've already mastered that months ago. And also, your program comment brings up an important thing. Scientists have not been that interested in comparing program A against program B for over 40 years. There was some work done in the 60s, and it kind of was hard to come up with an answer when they're comparing programs. At least that's the word I've heard. And so I think they abandoned that approach, and they've been looking at if they look at instruction, they're more likely to look at this principle versus this principle, and as opposed to program A versus program B. So again, that puts the parent or the teacher who's trying to make decisions in a little harder spot if they're going to say, I have to use a program that's based in science. Well, you can get a program that checks some boxes and is aligned with some scientific principles, but you can rarely say this program is superior to all the other programs or is superior to specifically program B or whatnot. So it is still a developing area. And I hope reading researchers will move to looking more at program to program comparisons as this science of reading movement has gotten so hot, because teachers and schools and districts and parents, they need clearer answers.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some fun ways that teachers, including parents who are homeschooling or just providing extra support at home, how can they make that reading instruction fun and interactive for their kids?
I love interactive. One of the secrets is to quickly teach them to be successful. So a lot of programs, that was one of the hallmarks. The deceptive successes really of balanced literacy. You sit down a kid with a leveled text where they can parrot the beginning sentence, and by looking at the picture, I see a bear, I see a tiger, I see an elephant, and they think they're reading, and it has the appearance of success. And that's one of the reasons that got legs, I think, for so many years, because everybody wants their kid to feel successful, and that's what makes reading fun. But some of the kids deduced the code from that, but most didn't. And as a result, they were tricked into trying to use the wrong strategies. So with Reading Simplified, we try to really quickly get kids access to the code and not, for instance, teach 13 weeks of the alphabet and only later let them read or spell a simple CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant word like cat or hop. So we could do actual word building, word reading, word spelling in the first week of kindergarten by just choosing a handful of letter sounds, M, T, S, P, maybe, and building simple words, map, sat, mom. Maybe we throw an O in there. And so they when they experience success, that is fun. That's a huge part. Also, we like to do word work activities to develop sound-based decoding that tend to be interactive and fun. One of the most powerful ones that works for beginning kids who don't even know their letter sounds, and it works for struggling readers who are maybe in the 6th grade and they're 2 or 3 years behind. We call it Switch It. So if you can imagine some lines on a paper or on the back of a dry erase board to show the placement of a word where you might put words, and you have some letter sound cards or tiles. Each one has an individual letter sound on it, like T, or A, or even CH. Ch would be on one tile. So for a beginning child, a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, you ask the child to build the word map and pull down those sounds. So this is tying sounds and symbols. Let's make map, pulling down one tile. Okay, you have map. Let's change it to mat. What do we need to take away to make map into mat? And this is a little challenge. Paired contrast gets the kids kind of excited. They feel like it's a game. Okay, they need to take away the p, and what sound goes there at mat? T. That's right. Which one of these is t? And so they have a couple to choose from, not all the letters of the alphabet, so as to not overwhelm them. And so they go from map to mat to mat to sat to sit to sip to ship. And so they're understanding more about the code, learning phonics knowledge, and learning phonemic awareness, how to process those sounds and those words so that they are more quick to decode and encode or spell. And then an older reader could do the very same thing, except it would be more challenging. Okay, you have stomp. Let's change it to stump. Now let's change stump to slump. Which one of these cards? Yeah, we need to get rid of the t and pull in the l to make slump. Now tell me the sounds in slump. S, l, m, p. And switch it is what that is. It's fun, and you can increase the difficulty for your child. The other secret that we have is using the dry erase board to teach blending in our activity that we call Read It. Again, you can level this based on the child's needs. If the child is 4 or 5 and can't blend a simple 3-sound word, you would write, a word like sat on the board, and you would coach them to put the sounds together. Sat. That's we call blend as you read. That's more powerful, according to research, than going at. What word? Because connecting those sounds makes it easier on their brains. So they read the word sat, and then they write the word sat on the dry erase marker, saying the sounds as they do it. At. And then they erase the sounds as they finish the activity, erasing at. And kids love dry erase. There's some magic about it. Even adults and teens think it's just inherently fun. So that's helpful. And then you're zeroing in on the level that the child really needs to improve on, but is not uber frustrated by. So again, the 5th grader who's struggling, you might do a word like strict, or maybe a multi-syllable word like intelligent, and you would help them to write it in chunks. They might read it in chunks, intelligent, and they would also write it that way, intelligent. And so those are 2 activities that are, you can see they're very academic, but the materials and the challenges and the level of scaffolding help kids find them to be fun. And those are some secrets. And then the other thing is to always read to your kids, let them have access to books on, what we used to call tape, and help them learn as they're doing the hard work of learning to decode, help them continue their enjoyment of literacy by having that extra scaffold of a mature reader supporting them, whether that is like a direct one-on-one with a parent or a teacher sitting down and reading to them, or listening to a podcast, listening to a story, and ideally even maybe following along. I think that the Kindle Fire and Amazon Kindle have really cool technology. You can sync the ebook with the Audible professional recording, and the text will highlight as the narrator reads it. If the child loses her place, you can tap the screen and the audio will pick up right as the text is highlighted. So I'm a big fan of continuing support for reading aloud and following along as we're building decoding. That will generally be fun. It will help kids kind of sustain themselves in thinking that reading is fun when some of it becomes harder work, because it is hard work for a season, particularly for some children. Learning to read is like on a bell curve, like most skills. Some of us are naturally good at picking up a tune, and some of us struggle with that. And so if we struggle, then we're going to need more practice, and a variation, and games can help with that. Spreading the activities out across the day, literally doing 3 minutes after breakfast, 3 minutes when they come home, and 10 minutes before bed. I mean, how many of us have bent the rules for our children at bedtime because they're reading? Okay, I'll let you sleep, stay up later if you're,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I loved everything you just said because all of it was like, yep, 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 let's do that. Including the last thing with little bits here. That's one thing that I've said multiple times on the podcast is like it's so powerful. Like just a couple of minutes, multiple times a day is so much more powerful than like once a week tutoring for now.
Right.
Like that
Right.
multiple times a day. We just want to hit it tiny bits, lots of repetition, practice, and right before bed that, they've shown like whatever you're thinking about right before bed is the thing you're practicing kind of as you're sleeping almost. Like you learn it better. So I'm always
Mhm.
like, right before bed, whatever you most want your kid to learn, that's what you do right before bed. Or as close to that as you can, but also throughout the day as that extra practice. So yeah, I so agree with everything that you just said. And it was also good reminders to me and like, yep, those are things that sometimes I don't do enough of. Okay, yeah. So
Oh, it's hard to squeeze it all in as a parent.
yeah. Yes, it is. All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share about reading? And then also, how can people get a hold of you and learn more about what you're offering?
Well, I imagine a lot of your parents don't have access to really good information about how their child is doing in reading. In most places in America, in most schools, we might get a level and we know we're on level or we're not, but that doesn't tell you what to do. So, a lot of children struggle with sound-based decoding, and that can be hidden for some kids who have very strong visual memories. A
Mhm.
child who's in, the upper elementary should be practically flawless with their decoding. And so sometimes we think, oh, they're doing okay because they're only missing 1 out of 10 words, 1 out of 20 words, but that's actually still a lot of struggle. Just imagine if you were reading a physics text, maybe you even knew all the words, but if you stumbled on out of every 20 words, how long are you going to keep that book open?
Right.
No, we're not doing it. As an adult, a good reader is practically perfect with word
Right.
recognition. And so a nonsense word test can be very helpful for helping you reveal whether those underlying sound-based decoding skills are strong, because that's the foundation on which fluency is built. We have to attack unfamiliar words using a sound-based decoding approach. Then we learn to recognize words in a blink of an eye, and then we become fluent with reading words in a connected text. But so if have a third grader or a seventh grader, you're looking at fluency and you may be frustrated but that's on higher level skill. Let's dig down to make sure that the foundation is not cracked and with holes. So now a nonsense word test, non-word test, a word attack test. Those will help you pinpoint if there's some crumbling in that foundation. And then you can do activities like I just mentioned, switch it, for instance, to help reinforce that foundation. And if it's significantly behind, then get some training yourself or get somebody to help you. The schools are really trying, but in general, right now, if a child is struggling, most schools are not good at catching them up. So I hate to say it, but a parent would be wise to think about what she or he can do outside of school if the school's not actually accelerating your student if they're behind. At Reading Simplified, we have some informal measures that you can give your student, and including a nonsense word test. So if you go to readingsimplified.com/reading tests, you can find it, or you could even just Google reading tests and Reading Simplified. And so that is something that I encourage parents to get informed and get the tools so that they know where their student stands. And of course, not everyone is going to have that issue. And so great if you don't, but it's a really important thing to catch because a lot of schools aren't giving us that data. Teachers don't know this, especially upper elementary, middle school teachers, high school teachers. They don't know this in general. And so a parent could be informed and then go to the root of the problem. And at Reading Simplified, we have a lot of complimentary trainings on just a handful of activities that move the needle. So you could go to our website and look for Switch It or Read It, which I talked about, or Sort It, which is helpful for learning what we call advanced phonics, like the long vowels or the sound as in her, girl, earth, worm, etc. And so those are complementary with lots of word lists and activities and video examples. And then we also have the Reading Simplified Academy, where parents can, or teachers can get trained in our system and apply it themselves.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'll make sure that we have some links to some of that in the show notes so everybody can check that out and see what you have to offer. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, Marnie. It was really great to talk to you and to get all of these ideas and insights and your wisdom. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
it's my privilege. Thank you for what you're doing, Kimberlyn.